Okay, so next topic of conversation is the elementary building block that comprises kidneys, which is a nephron. Nephron is essentially the smallest functional unit of the kidney that allows it to perform its functions. And we're going to start with the description of the nephron structure. Nephron consists, first of all, it consists of the glomerulus. So what is glomerulus? Glomerulus is the network of the capillaries Okay, here, you see that network of capillaries? See that? Those are glomerular capillaries. These glomerular capillaries filter the blood and produce filtrate, which then enters the glomerular capsule, and from the glomerular capsule filtrate moves into the proximal convoluted tubule. From the proximal, actually I'm going to make it a different color to illustrate my point a bit later. So it drains into the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay. Proximal convoluted tubule extends into so-called nephron loop. This is nephron loop. This is proximal convoluted tubule. And then nephron loop extends into the distal convoluted tubule, which is ultimately connected to the collecting duct. Okay. Does that make sense so far? Now, as I mentioned before, glomerular capsule and glomerular capillaries together, they form glomerulus. So what happens at each step? So in the glomerulus, the process that occurs here is called filtration. Okay. And proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, and distal convoluted tubule responsible mostly for the reabsorption and secretion. I'm going to explain what it is. Reabsorption occurs mostly in the proximal convoluted tubule. And secretion occurs mostly in the distal convoluted tubule. But I want to make it very clear. Listen, this is not exclusive. So there's some reabsorption that happens at DCT. A lot of secretion and reabsorption happens in the nephron loop, so it's kind of distributed throughout the tubular system. Am I clear? Oh, okay, awesome. So let's break down what's going on at each step. Now, what are these? Those are arterioles. So this one is afferent arteriole. We're going to call it AA. And this one is efferent arteriole. EA. Now look at the direction of the blood flow in afferent and efferent arterioles. Check this out. So blood enters the glomerular capillaries from the afferent arterioles, and then these glomerular capillaries are drained by efferent arteriole. If you look at this, it makes nephron, makes this capillary bed of glomerular capillaries somewhat unique. This is one of, I don't know if it's the only capillary, I think it is the only capillary bed, check this out, that is supplied and drained by arterioles. Does that make sense? Usually it's the arteriole and the venule, but in this case it's arteriole and arteriole. A question. Which of these arterioles, based on the picture, which of them is wider? The afferent one, right? So it means that you have a massive pipe going into the, supplying the blood, and a relatively narrow pipe that drains the bed. Does that make sense? So that explains why the pressure in glomerular capillaries is high. Does that make sense to you? So glomerular capillaries it's a pipe, right? Look at this pipe. In the pipe there's blood, and there's obviously simple squamous epithelium here. But on the outside, glomerular capillaries are surrounded by the cells called podocytes, more specifically the food processes. Okay, so this, look, podocyte, I have an illustration. I'm not going to picture podocyte because I'm not going to be as good as the professional illustrator. So it's all in the notes. Are you with me? But what's important is that these are so-called food processes of podocytes. Now, you can see that these food processes, check this out, they are separated. They're not like immediately next to each other, right? So these gaps, called filtration slits. We cool? That's filtration slits. Now, filtration slits will allow the passage water, ions, small molecules. Okay? Now, look what happens here. Blood flows through the glomerular capillary. Okay? Since pressure is pretty high, water, ions, and small molecules are being pushed. Does that make sense? They're being pushed from the capillaries into the glomerular capsule, forming a filtrate. Does that make sense? The filtrate, and this is why, when physicians look at the urine, if there are proteins present, for example, or cells, it means that those filtration slits suddenly expanded. You see what I'm saying? Something is wrong here. And proteins and cells from the blood start entering the filtrate. It shouldn't happen. Am I clear? Does that make sense to you? Now, sorry, not filtration, filtrate. My bad. So filtrate here. Filtrate is formed in the glomerular capsule, drains from the glomerular capsule into the proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule. By the time it reaches collecting duct, it's not a filtrate anymore, it's basically urine. Does that make... Huh?
It turns into urine when it hits the case.
It doesn't turn, but here's the thing. Listen, I can't say from top of my head, I can't make this calculation right off the bat. Hang on a second, I'm multiplying. Just bear with me for a second, okay? All right, so I can tell you, okay, normally, look, a healthy person produces, now listen closely to those numbers, you don't need to memorize them, I guarantee. A healthy person produces 180 liters of filtrate. 1 liter is about a quart. So imagine you generate about 200 quarts of filtrate. If you think about an average human, we do not produce 200 quarts of pee a day. Does that make sense? So basically filtrate is very, very diluted. Are you following me? And as filtrate passes through the tubular system, it gets more and more concentrated. And the volume of the filtrate is reduced from 180 to about 2 liters of urine a day. We clear? Now, this process of concentration is referred to as reabsorption. Okay? That makes sense? So, essentially, if you think about it, what happens in the capsule is the fluid, ions, and small molecules are filtered out of the blood into the glomerular capsule. It's like you walking into your closet and you throw away 99% of all clothing that you have. Does that make sense? Then, as filtrate passes through the proximal convoluted tubule, it is reabsorbed. The ions and water and small molecules are reabsorbed in the capillaries. These capillaries, we're going to talk about them. And then this capillaries drain into the venule. Does that make sense? Now, look what happens. Like, let's take a look at the overall picture here. Look. Blood enters glomerular capillaries, loses an enormous proportion of water, ions, and small molecules. Does that make sense? They flow here, and then they get reabsorbed back into the same blood. So essentially for the blood, the path goes like this. Afferent arteriole, okay, glomerular capillaries, efferent arteriole, tubular capillaries, venue. Am I making sense right now? Now, there are two different types of nephrons, big types of nephrons. We're going to talk about these types and then we're going to start talking about something else. Nephrons can be cortical. Look at this. And in case of cortical nephrons, these capillaries are called peritubular capillaries. Or nephrons can be juxtamedullary. So basically, look at this. Cortical nephrons are, I think I have a, let's see if I have. So I kind of have an illustration here. So this, look, this is more of a cortical nephron. You see it is located mostly in the cortex. Okay? This one, the long one, is juxtamedullary. So it is located very much in the medulla. It extends all the way down. You see that? So the system of capillaries that goes around the nephron loop in juxtamedullary nephron is called vasa recta. We translate it from Latin, straight vessels. Vasa is vessel, recta is straight. You clear so far? Good? Moving on. So I'm going to use this little model to illustrate few parts of the nephron. So this right here is the glomerulus. You see glomerular capillaries. You see the yellow stuff? This yellow stuff is podocytes, the cells that form food processes. This large vessel here is afferent arteriole, and the small one is efferent arteriole. Okay? This is the proximal convoluted tubule over here. Are you following me? On this example here, you can see collecting duct. You can see cortical and juxtamedullary nephron. Okay, so far so good? And in this nephron you can see, like, that's glomerulus. This is the proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule, which connects to the collecting duct. Now, last thing about this two types of nephrons. So what is the role for each nephron? Cortical nephrons are mostly responsible for general reabsorption and secretion, while juxtamedullary nephrons responsible for urine concentration regulation. Good?